Okay, we're back, and welcome to the Kingdom Podcast. Today is an interesting conversation we're going to have. It's based on something that the team and I were doing about a month ago. We started reading a book, being a renewable energy company and a team learning lots about energy. We read about, a book a month about different topics related to the space. We've read everything about the grid, energy finance, etc. And about a month ago, we started reading a book called Superpower. There's so many layers of interesting dynamic around the name. It's a great name for the book. But the book is about one man who set out to reshape the future of American energy and the challenges that he and his team faced during that time frame parallels so much with a lot of what we're doing here at Soluna. And we have the distinct pleasure to have the subject of the book, Mr. Michael Skelly, with us today. Michael is a senior advisor at Lazard, where he counsels companies on renewable energy and sustainability. But prior to that, he was founder and president of a company called Clean Line Energy, which set out to build a huge power line to move energy from Oklahoma to the East Coast all the way to Memphis. And the story of that project and what happened with the team and everything. And my goal today is to talk to Michael about his experience as head of that company and try my best not to spoil the book for anyone, because I highly recommend that you read it. It's by Russell Gold, an author who spends a lot of time visiting renewable energy events and activities around the country. Beautifully written book about Michael and his background and the project. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Fantastic.
Delighted to be talking to. I've run across a couple of companies like this that have their own reading groups, which I think is a fantastic idea.
Oh,
It
yeah.
helps the team share ideas. It's great.
Yeah, thank you. We do spend a lot of time reading. Well, actually, we'll talk a lot about sort of culture and some of the types of things you did at Clean Line on the show. To start, why don't you share with us a bit of your background? How did you get into renewable energy?
So I had spent, up until my late 20s, I've been in the Peace Corps. Then I went to business school. And out of business school, I wanted to do a startup. So I ended up partnering with some other folks, and we built a ski lift in the rainforest of Costa Rica. That's touched on a little bit in the book.
Yeah.
And in building that really exciting ecotourism project, and sort of we helped develop this sort of mini category of canopy tourism. Found I love building projects and the jigsaw puzzle, and that led me to hydroelectric projects and then wind and so on. And I'm sort of a projects guy and like to build things,
right?
And like the jigsaw puzzle of financial and technical and legal and social issues and political that all go into putting together an energy project.
Yeah. Would you say anything about your background made you that way? Is it something about your upbringing, or was it the initial experience in Costa Rica that made you realize that projects was your thing?
Probably always liked sort of concrete things. I was one of these kids who's always out playing in the dirt or whatever. We weren't allowed to watch television as children, so you had to find something else to do.
What did your parents do, out of curiosity?
So we immigrated to the United States from Ireland when I was a small child.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad's an electrical engineer, but I may be a frustrated engineer in there somewhere.
Yeah, I always say.
My mother's a physical therapist.
No, and your mother was? Say again.
She's a physical therapist.
Okay, and I asked that question because I'm a big believer in the role of DNA in helping to shape people. I'm constantly looking at my daughter and saying, is she going to be a computer scientist? And is she going to be an artist? There's an interesting combination between her and my wife and I in her, interestingly enough. So about your background, just looking here, if you look at your entree to renewable energy, was there any person that sort of drove your interest or helped to shape your approach to renewable energy in any way?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say the Zilka family. So I went I've been working in Central America on energy projects, moved to Texas in the late 90s to work with the Zilkas. And they had done really well in the shallow Gulf of Mexico, drilling for oil and gas.
Right.
And the Zilkas were, they trace their roots back to banking in Baghdad in the 1800s. And they were just a fantastic group of people to work with, and brought their sort of values to the company and how you worked with landowners and how you thought about working with different communities. They, as a family business, they sort of took a generational perspective on different issues that one might deal with. That was a great luxury to us as we built Zilka Renewable, which became Horizon and which is now EDP. It was a great luxury to have a family backing because it felt like it was easier to make the right call, and you could think a bit more long term, and you could bring to bear their values to how you went about building the business, and you could have a lot of conviction about the business at a time when, let's face it, in the late 90s, nobody knew that wind was going to turn out to be this really big thing.
Right.
And they, having their backing, gave us sort of the luxury to sort of think big.
Yeah. Another question I have for you is, did you know that Michael Zilka was, I want to be careful about how much I give away in the book, but as Zilka sort of transitioned from being a standalone company to ultimately being sold to Goldman, which created Horizon, did you know that Michael was in the process of selling the business?
Oh, yeah, of course. So our view was always that, when we started off in wind in the late 90s, our view was always, hey, this industry could take off. And if it does, let's go create the best in class developer, operator. Let's put together a fantastic team. Let's build projects that we're really proud of, that will do well over a long period of time. Let's build a company, even down to the data room. Like you didn't really do data rooms back then, but from day one, we had a data room because we knew and we planned like, hey, if this business takes off, ExxonMobil or somebody will say, I want to be in this business. They'll look around the industry and they will say, I got to buy those guys. And as it turned out, Goldman when they decided to sort of look at investing in renewables in the mid 2000s, they looked around the industry and they said, we want those guys. And, so, and we were ready to go really almost from the get-go.
Wow. And how would you describe, how long were you with Horizon post-acquisition until they ultimately left
so
HP?
So we stayed pretty much all the management team. We stayed around. The family sold in 2005. Goldman sold us in 2007. And I stayed through into 2008, and then I left and ran for Congress. That was sort of the motive. I was pretty happy there, but I felt like now was a good time to run, and so off I went.
Got it. What was that like? What was it like? Was it much different under the Goldman umbrella? The reason I'm asking is what fascinated me about the book, at least the way it was portrayed, was that this whole tax equity concept, and maybe you can explain that to our listeners, which was part of what drove, it seems, the growth of the industry. But it seems like the fact that there was such a big player, big capital in the business, pulled in a tremendous amount of product sales and growth. It just fired up the ecosystem. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. So somebody gave me the advice when we sold to Goldman and said, congratulations, everything that was easy will now be hard. When everything that was hard will be easy.
Oh, interesting.
I think it's sort of a good way to think about that. But no, Goldman, they believed in the team and they put a tremendous amount of capital at risk and gave us the ability to scale the business that, in a way with family ownership, we just would not have been able to do that. One of the advantages was that, as you probably know, in the U.S., if you generate a kilowatt hour of electricity, you get a tax credit of like 2.3 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Those credits all go away over the next 4 years, and they'll be totally gone by the end of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
But the ability to sort of efficiently use those credits was helpful because it gave a lot. If you knew what you could do with the credits, it would lend some velocity to your business. So that was the biggest advantages, though, were really the ability to use tax credits to have at our, they didn't just give it to us. They put us through our paces, but to have access to large amounts of capital at a time when the business really required a huge amount of money, that was fantastic, helpful.
I see. Got it. Continuing down those lines, I wanted to talk to you a little bit, or perhaps share with our listeners, the business of renewable energy development. How does a developer operator make money?
So basically, this is a vast oversimplification, but let's say you're going to build a wind farm in Illinois. You go sign up the landowners. So let's say you want to do a 400 megawatt project. You need 20,000 acres.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably, 100 landowners. You got to sign them up. You got to go through a county permitting process. It usually has some state permits, but the county permit is the main thing. You got to study the grid and make sure you can inject that power there. Then you put all the engineering, you cost the project, you cost it out, and you come up with, okay, what do I need to sell this electricity for to make a sort of an investable return for your investors? And then you're out there trying to sell the power once you find somebody who will buy the power. And that's obviously a huge inflection point in terms of the value, because if you don't have anybody to buy the power, it's not worth much. So once you get the customer, then you're ready to go. So you finance a project with a combination of equity, true equity, tax equity, which is a way to package the tax benefits for a certain class of investors, plus some debt. And with that financing package in hand, you order the equipment and build the project, and off you go. And if things go really well, you've spent, maybe 4 or 5 years putting together all the pieces, and then you spend another year building the project. So in 5 or 6 years, you've deployed, in this case, 400 megawatts, call it a $500 million project.
Mm-hmm. And that
the return, the returns are fairly, you're creating electricity, you're selling it. There's not, depending on how your contract is structured, you might have relatively little risk other than wind risk and equipment risk. So investors will invest in a project like that at a fairly low return.
Mm-hmm.
And that, by the way, shows up in low power prices because other people can do the same thing. And that's one of the reasons that, renewables are super cheap in the U.S. is because it's a highly competitive field, but there are returns, that are sort of reasonably attractive. Nobody's like making a killing, but you come up with projects that are sufficiently attractive that you can bring in investors to support.
And given the return and what would you say would be the range? You're talking about high single digits? double digits?
Yeah, sort of unlevered, high single, and levered low double-digit returns.
Got it. And
that's a 25-year return.
25 years, because that's typically the life of the product, the turbine.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, great. I want to switch to Cleanline for a second, sort of with that as a backdrop. That's the business. That's a typical renewable energy business. That's what you're typically trying to do, and that's how long it takes, et cetera. Tell us about Cleanline Energy. First of all, how did you come up with the idea? What was it, and how did you come up with the idea? This was after you had run for Congress, and we'll get back to that later.
After my second place finish.
Okay, got it. No, that's okay.
No, I only ran once, but I came in second, so I got the silver medal. With politics, it's not.
Yes, exactly.
That didn't get you much, but in any event, we've been developing wind for a long time, and it was clear then, and it's even more clear today, that the obstacle to more wind development was building out the grid. And we said, okay, the answer here is to go to the best wind resources in the country, because the more windy it is, the more electricity you can generate with a given amount of capital expenditure. And let's build the best wind location in the country and move the power hundreds of miles to a place where the power can get used. So pretty simple idea. The complexities, obviously, in the permitting and execution and sort of lining everything up. So that's what Cleanline set out to do.
So comparing it to the other business architecture you talked about, so you still had to sign up landowners. You still had to get somebody to buy the power. The key difference in Cleanline was that the users of the energy, the power buyers, could be thousands of miles away versus in that local area, sort of within reach of the power plant, right?
Yes.
And
or hundreds of, not thousands, but
hundreds of miles away. Sorry. And let's say, why did you feel that was important at the time? What did you see was missing in the American energy market, such that was something that the market really needed?
Yeah. Well, what we saw at the time was that, particularly in the Southeast, they didn't have access to great wind. 2009, wind was far and away the best and cheapest resource. It still is. And we thought, all right, if there's going to be a national consumption of renewables, we got to get the power to where the people are.
Right.
So that made sense to us. At the time, we still had some volatility around natural gas, so the fixed price contracts for renewables we felt like would be attractive. And the other thing is that we sort of knew that the cost of wind would continue to come down, and the technology would just get better and better, which sure enough that happened.
Right.
So those were sort of the main motivations for trying to build these big lines. And then there's other benefits in terms of so we had a project Grain Belt from Kansas to Indiana. That project, it turns out that when the wind blows in Indiana, it's not blowing in Kansas, and vice versa. So if you spread wind out across a broad geographic area, then it's more readily integrated at large volumes into the grid.
Got it. So those are the things you saw. That were unique and interesting, that could potentially sort of transform the whole space.
And the other thing was that it was clear, like, the government wasn't going to do this because we don't really rely on the government to build the grid, and utilities, which they typically focus on state by state or even half a state basis. So it was clear they weren't going to go do this. So we needed a private party to step up and see if they could figure this out. And maybe it's living in Houston that inspires one for such a thing, because in Houston, well, the way we move a lot of energy in this country is through a vast pipeline system of natural gas pipes and oil pipes. And living in Houston, you're obviously pretty aware of that. So
Yeah.
this was sort of the electrical equivalent of very long distance gas pipelines.
Got it. And in terms of the technology for the lines, was that existing technology? Did you just transport it from another place in the world that was already in use? And if so, what was that? Where was that?
Yeah. So the technology is high voltage direct current, which was invented actually in the 30s by General Electric. It's now common in Europe, or European companies have sort of pioneered its further development. The Chinese are building like literally dozens of high voltage direct current transmission lines because they have the same, or they've got energy resources in Western China. They need to get the power to market, and so the technology is very well developed.
Michael, we lost you there for a little bit. Looks like you're. Are you on Wi-Fi on your phone or cellular?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you were saying the Chinese have been doing this for a while because they have the same problem. They have power lines that are far away.
Yeah. So the Chinese have a similar challenge. They've got great energy resource in Western China.
Right.
They got to get power to market. And so for the last 25 years or so, they've been building high voltage direct current transmission lines from Western China to the seaboard, where most of the people and much of the industry sits, and that's been absolutely integral to the economic development that we've seen in China over the last 25 years.
So the clean line was about the lines, the transmission lines, different from a typical developer where you're building a power plant and selling the power through existing lines. What were the tell us about the investor pitches when you took this to market? First of all, how many do you think you pitched before you got a yes? Looks like. Do you remember?
Well, there's some info. There's some entertaining scenes about that in the book that you may have had similar experiences yourself over the years.
Absolutely. It's part of being entrepreneurial for sure.
Right.
But what were the typical reactions? Give us one or two that perhaps have stuck with you over the years.
Well, yeah. I mean, one was Salim Zilka. So the Zilkas were a father and son team, and Salim, Michael wanted to invest, and Salim said, "Look, I'm in my 80s. This is crazy. It's not going to happen. If it does happen, it's going to take a million years, and I won't be around. So I'm out.
I'm out.
Interested."
Yeah, exactly.
Furthermore, I don't want to. It's such a bad idea. He said, I'm happy to give you money, but I don't want to encourage you by giving you money.
Encourage you to go and actually do it, right? I do remember that from the book. That was very colorful, and I think I laughed out loud on that one.
Another one was, you'll have to read the book to find out who it was, but you do this pitch in San Francisco to this fund, and I walked them through the pitch. It was over lunch. I walked them through the pitch, and they listened politely while they eat their sandwiches. Yeah. And then they finished lunch and just walked out and left me to eat lunch by myself.
Yeah. In other words, if you don't get their response from that, it's not.
That's clearly a no.
Clearly a no, right? Exactly.
I'm pretty sure they said, we'll get back to you, but I kind of knew the answer at that point.
But later on, you did attract some pretty impressive investors, right? You got
the Ziff family invested, National Grid, and then a Dallas-based fund called Bluescape. They also invested, and so we had great backers.
Berkshire Hathaway was that one of the ones you pitched, or did they
we did pitch them? We did pitch Berkshire at some point. Turns out they were more. It was a little early stage for them. They've typically done later stage investments in renewables.
Okay. And not
so early stage as what we were doing.
And they're typically trying to own the asset. I'm learning this whole investor landscape.
Yes.
Some people want to come in at the development stage. Some people want to buy into the revenues.
They'd rather participate once the asset is about to go into construction or
up and running.
up and running. Yeah.
Got it. Let's talk about the company, Clean Line itself, and your leadership, the team. We spent a lot of time talking about, our core values as a company. We've done a few podcasts where we introduce people to what we care about and why we're doing the things we're doing the way we're doing them. Did you have a set of core values at Clean Line? And if so, what were those?
Yeah, I did. And we spent a lot of time on that. And more trying to really trying to live them as much as we could.
Yeah.
We knew that what we were doing, proposing to do was an imposition on landowners and communities. So you just got to be honest about that, and then do everything in your power to mitigate it. Mm-hmm. We also felt like it was super important to provide people with really high fidelity information. Okay.
Yes.
So, and some people might oppose it. It might hurt us in some cases because people would pick at that. But, we felt like we got to tell people exactly what we're doing, what these projects look like, visual impact, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And that was super important. Just kind of telling people the truth about what we're doing and why we're doing it. That felt super important for a couple of reasons. One is, we're working on several projects in different states, and there's regulatory processes, and everything you do is under vast public scrutiny. Mm-hmm. So the easiest way to make sure that everything sort of lines up is just keep telling the truth. And if you do, you won't confuse your stakeholders and you won't confuse yourself. Right. And it's just it's just way simpler just to tell the truth at all times. Yeah. Because if you start fibbing about this and that, you can't even keep track of it after a while.
Yeah.
And so that was important. The other thing that felt pretty important was, I think with any complex project, it does take a team, because you've got, the financial and the technical and the permitting and regulatory and so on. So a big value for us was try to keep all those pieces of the projects in sync. And that meant probably more project meetings than some people might have preferred at times.
Right.
It meant office setup where you'd have regulatory people sitting with communications people, sitting with technical people, sitting with landowner people, try to mix the team together so that everybody understood all the different perspectives that you need to have on a complex project. And quite honestly, a big part of my job was making sure that the communications, either in regulatory settings or in the media or landowners, whatever, were consistent across projects and over a very long period of time.
Interesting.
That was also pretty important.
You also spent a lot of time with the stakeholders. You seem to do a lot of community meetings, introducing the project and the details, as you talked about, sort of being really open with folks and about what was going on and so forth. Is there anything you would have done, which I think is fascinating? Is there anything you would have done differently looking back as it relates to those meetings?
Not really. There's a few tactical questions around permitting and how we would have done the routing approach. We might have done a few things differently in terms of how we went about that. It's one of the challenge with stakeholder meetings and so on is that you can't do enough of it. It's a little bit like a political campaign. You can't talk to enough voters. You can't touch them enough times. You can't spend enough time talking to your opponents. You can't spend enough time trying to do a better job. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the biggest challenge.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about I want to go to something else before we go to more about the team and leadership. This is my favorite part of the book. It's something that goes throughout the Clean Line story, and it's a speech that you would give consistently, and it was about the 5 phases of project development.
Yes.
I was reading and also doing the audiobook, and so my ears would peak when you would touch on that. Could you take us through the 5 phases here, please?
Well, this is super important to any project developer, but they're the first stage is euphoria, and you can't believe that you've got this amazing idea that nobody else has come up with.
Yeah.
And so enjoy that moment as long as possible. The second phase is utter despair, when you're thinking like, oh my gosh, what were we thinking about? How did it occur to us to try something so preposterous?
Right.
The third stage is to search for the guilty who've come up with a stupid idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody has to take the fall, and
right.
Not going to be me. So you got it. Punishment of the innocent. Very important phase, particularly in big corporations. They're good at this. And then finally, riches and glory for the uninvolved.
Mm-hmm.
And as you'll see in the book, we hope to reach that phase as soon as possible.
Right. Got it. So, I love that concept very much because number one, we were discussing here. What phase are we in? In our project.
My experience, as long as you're bouncing back and forth between phases 1 and 2, you're good.
Okay. That was going to be one of my questions. Is like, is it sort of sequential? Once you go one way, you can't. It's like a one-way door. So that's helpful. And then
I think once you start on number 3 and 4, you're kind of done. You got to bounce between 1 and 2, and then hopefully you get
past there. Never see the last one or something.
Yeah, you skip 3 and 4, and you go straight to stage 5.
Yeah. So my question for you is, where did that come from? I mean, it's so simple, brilliant.
I don't know. I don't know where that came from, but it's a friend of mine came up with it.
Okay.
And, I've used it ever since, and I think he heard it from somebody else. And so
Got it. Yeah, we do discuss it every now and then. I don't have a speech built around it yet, but maybe I will someday.
For almost every moment in a company's development.
Yeah, I think it's probably applicable to other types of companies too, which I think I'll give some thought. Let's talk about leadership and culture. How would you describe the culture of CleanLine? There's some examples given in the book that if you walk through the offices, it looked less like an energy company, looked more like a technology company. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. I don't think that we were trying to look like a technology company, because I think the stuff particularly late. But like, what are you trying to achieve? You're trying to achieve communications. And that means a flatter organization. You're also trying to achieve communications across different pieces of projects, so the environmental and the technical, for example, or the environmental and the political. So you got to build that into the culture. We were, we knew, and I think you kind of, if you're doing something new or really anything you're doing, you always got to keep learning. So you got to create a culture where you're learning. That means you got to make sure people feel free to ask dumb questions.
Yeah.
If you're in a leadership role, you have to, just ask dumb questions yourself, because you typically, or maybe not typically, but often enough, if you're the leader, you're the dumbest person there anyhow.
Right.
Technical matters.
Yeah.
So ask those questions. If you're trying to do something really big, being humble, I think is pretty important, because outsiders respond better to that, and when you're not humble, you're a little bit insulated, and you don't learn as much as you ought to. The other, we because nobody really done this. This is one of the exciting things about doing something that hasn't been done much before, is you can hire people for their get up and go and their chutzpah and their just sort of grit and determination and sort of raw intelligence, and they can sort of figure out the rest.
Yeah, I noticed you did that a lot. You hired young people who were passionate about changing the world.
Yeah, and we actually, I mean, speaking of the generation part, we had a couple of people like retired school teachers or old, like we had a couple of women who worked for us, and they were like legit former rodeo champions.
Wow.
So if you're a rodeo champion, you got like grit, determination.
Yeah, that's all baked in, right?
Yeah. And so that, and those people had other very successful careers elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't just young, energetic people. I think Russell pointed that out in the book, but I think there it was more than just that. And particularly out in the field, because most people, or particularly people who own land in rural America, they're older folks. So having people with a similar outlook on life, working with them, I thought was pretty helpful. Yeah. And then finally, just kind of an expectation that everybody try to stay on the same page. I thought that was, and over communicating. Like I talked to so we were very religious about recording all contacts with outside constituencies and sharing those across the company, so that anytime we went back to somebody, we would know, okay, this is what we said to them last time. And that way we could be consistent in our communications with people over many, many years, because a landowner in the Oklahoma Panhandle is going to remember what you said.
Right.
So getting that, remembering what you said by writing it down was super important. And then the other thing was writing. We have a culture of like not just writing stuff down, but writing clearly and in an articulate and compelling way. We all thought that was pretty important.
For both internal communication and external communication?
Especially external.
Yeah.
Like be clear what you're saying. Right.
And how did you do that so well? Did you hire people with writing histories? Or?
Yeah, we like asked for writing samples on the way in, but I think good writing is often just a matter of practice.
Yeah.
Or writing.
And they were writing a lot, and they understood why they were writing.
Get better at it,
yeah. The part of what you were looking to do was so new, and one of the things that were clear to us in the book was that you were hoping that it would be successful, and when you came up with the idea, but not just that it would be something that is replicated, that everyone was doing. This is something we actually, the reason I point this out, we have the same feeling. If what we're doing at Soluna ultimately becomes successful, we want everybody to do it. Why did you feel that way? I'll tell you why we feel that way.
Because we need more infrastructure if we're going to get more renewable energy, and we're going to need a lot more infrastructure than we as a company will ever be able to build.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the main motivation.
Got it. That's similar view that we have. If it's a way to catalyze more renewable energy globally, we want everybody to kind of help us do it so we can get there faster.
Yes.
And that's why we want people to take what we're doing ultimately and do it around the world. And when you look at the concept of a startup, you're a young company, again, doing something that hadn't been done before. You did have this view, though, that we should never look at ourselves or present ourselves as a startup. Why did you say that to your team?
Well, yeah, I can't remember exactly how I said it, but
we should try to punch above our weight.
Yeah,
was the quote that we're using.
That's right. Yeah. So we are at the end of the day, if you're going to do a big infrastructure project, that's an imposition on some people.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to take that responsibility very seriously. And there's an asymmetry of information. So you got to know what you're doing. You got to look like you know what you're doing. And
right.
That was,
yeah, we can certainly relate to that. Last question in this section, and I'm going to move on because we're running out of time for you. Another quote: "This is business. This is the business of overcoming obstacles." What does that mean to you? And put it in the context of Clean Line for us.
A couple of things. One is like you're putting together a project. It's piece by piece by piece by piece. It doesn't all come together at once. You knock out one thing, another thing, another thing. So you just got to knock down all the obstacles.
Mm-hmm.
The other is, it's maybe not quite as obvious, is if you're doing something that's going to take a decade,
right,
it actually kind of helps you pace yourself because you get something done. Oh, wow, we got that done. Next thing.
I see.
So it sort of divides life up into more manageable chunks.
Interesting. That's a very interesting perspective. I want to switch to politics now, Michael. So you ran for Congress in Texas's 7th district.
Yes.
It was a Republican stronghold, apparently, and you ran as a Democrat. And what made you decide to run? You mentioned it earlier that you felt it was the right time. But why did you want to go into politics in the first place?
Well, politics has a bad name, and I guess maybe justifiably so. But
I didn't mean to come across negative. I just mean,
no.
What made you think to go from being an entrepreneur to going into public?
Oh, I just thought that I could, that we need people from various perspectives in politics, and I thought somebody who's done renewable energy, that would be a good addition to Congress.
Mm-hmm.
Public policy is super interesting. Getting the right mix of government, figuring out the right role of government and determining policy and budgetary priorities is super important. The district that I was running in was a Democratic district until like 1966 when George Bush 41 won the seat, or 68 maybe, and then it's been a Republican up until 2018. So I was sort of a decade ahead of my time. That district it was won by a woman named Lizzie Fletcher in this past November. So it was a great, that's quite satisfying that, okay, it didn't happen for me, but it did happen. I was a decade early, but maybe contribute in a tiny way to her ultimate success.
That's great. We didn't look at that history, but that is fascinating. What was that like? What would you say you learned the most during that experience?
So you actually learn to respect politicians. I mean, being a politician it's hard work. You got to put in a lot of hours.
Yeah.
Campaigning it's a surprising amount of repetition. So selling companies or raising money, you're out there saying the same thing again and again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
In politics, you're doing that as well, only it's even more simplified and you're saying it more often. So that part of politics is a little bit of a drag that you have to repeat yourself so much. But the exciting thing is you have this license to go meet all kinds of people and talk to them about whatever they're interested in. And for some people, that's probably terrible. But for me, it's really, I'm kind of an extrovert and like to meet new people and hear what's going on.
Right.
So that was super interesting. And then the other piece of it was that this was kind of not as fun. You got to talk about yourself constantly. And that was a drag.
Got it.
Now, some people, that's their favorite topic. Actually, for a lot of us, it's our favorite topic. But after campaigning for days and days, you don't really want to talk about yourself. You want to hear what else is going on with other people.
What do you think would be different about our view on climate and the climate crisis in the U.S. if you had been elected?
Oh, well, if I'd been elected in 2008, I would have lost in 2010 during the Tea Party wipeout.
Right. Interesting.
So
you wouldn't have been much role there.
Maybe you get something done, a little bit done, but
yeah.
2010 was a really bad year for Democrats who won swing districts.
Got it. What would you say concerns you the most about the current administration's energy policy, if you have an opinion?
I would say, there's almost this like deliberate disregard for facts. This methane rule.
That's an understatement. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This methane rule last week. I mean, like the oil companies, they don't even want that.
Right. Exactly.
The energy efficiency, the CAFE standards for cars, the automakers, they don't want that. So it's almost like a spiteful thing that anything that Obama did, they want to undo. Right.
It's a complete reversal of that.
Almost even though everybody agrees, but almost everybody agrees on a lot of this stuff. So that's mind-boggling.
So I want to point our lens to the future a bit, and this will be sort of the wrap up of our time. How much more time do we have?
Yeah, about 2 minutes.
Okay. I'll give you two questions. First question is, Oklahoma now has lots of renewable energy, wind farms. There's lots of renewable energy and wind use throughout the country. Do you think Clean Line had a lot to do with that?
No, because, hopefully we will. I mean, so we, not to spoil the end of the book, but we sold off the projects and hopefully they will be built and that will bring about more renewables.
Got it. And when we look at
I am fundamentally optimistic about building a lot more renewables in the U.S.
Yeah. And what do you say to someone who says, hey, renewables are intermittent and destroy the grid to put renewable power on the grid? What's your response to that, and how do you see renewable energy technology taking shape in the next few years?
It's just not true. I mean, I'm in Houston, and we're sitting in the ERCOT grid, which is one of the three grids in the United States. And on any given day, we can have 55% renewable energy, and no problem. Lights stay on, grid stays in balance, off we go. So it's wind and solar aren't the only solution, but they're super helpful. And if you add batteries to the mix, we can do a lot.
And do you think? Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And do you think we're going to see the end of fossil fuels in the near future?
Not in the near future, no.
But you'll see a change in the mixture of the global footprint.
I see a big change on the electric front. Decarbonizing transportation is going to be really difficult. Be heavy transport.
Right.
But we've come a lot further in renewable power than I and many others would ever have thought was imaginable. So I think we can get there. It's going to take a little while, though.
Yeah, I can see it accelerating as well. Okay, last question. And Russell, don't get mad at this. What books would you add to our book list, the energy book list?
Oh, that's it. So my favorite book about project development is The Path Between the Seas.
Between the Seas.
By David McCullough, it's about the history of the Panama Canal. And it has technical, geotechnical, geopolitical, hydrology, logistics, public health, engineering. I mean, you name it. It's got every issue you could ever want in a project. That's number one by a good margin. Colossus, about the Hoover Dam, another great book. The Wedding of the Waters, about the construction of the Erie Canal, sort of a build it and they will come story. That's a fantastic book. My favorite one about the Transcontinental Railroad is Empire Express by Bain. I think the guy's name is Bain. Great, weighty tone, but superbly well written. Right now, I'm reading the first Titan about Cornelius Vanderbilt by T.J. Stiles. That's fantastic.
Oh, that's great.
And then finally, you're in New York, so this is a great one. What's the name of it? It's Conquering Gotham.
Interesting.
Which is a history of the Pennsylvania Railroad's construction of the tunnels under the Hudson and Penn Station.
Wow.
Great New York book.
That sounds good.
Book, yeah.
That sounds great. Well, Michael, thanks for taking the time today. Sorry about the technical glitches. It's fascinating to have you on the podcast, and it's great getting to know you better. And hope to meet you in person soon.
All right. Look forward to staying in touch. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
So that was Michael Skelly, founder and president of Clean Line Energy, a story about a man who has been trying, actually. He's still at it, transforming American energy and the future of renewable energy globally. Thanks for joining us. This has been the Kingdom Podcast. See you next time.